it was necessary to return home immediately. It was good that Lena had warned her mother, with whom Alyosha had spent the whole evening, that they were late. She took her grandson home and even put him to bed, which she recently informed her daughter on the phone, promising to wait for their arrival. I had to hurry. On the other hand, there was the former lawyer Makagon, an important link in the long chain of Nikolai Sergeyevich Nezhnov's adventures. According to both Maxim and Lena, Makagon has already been given the task of organizing a bribe directly from the colonel himself. It's his idea to involve a theater actress in the case, or an improvisation by a lawyer. It doesn't matter anymore. The policeman simply would not have had enough time to build a longer scheme involving one or more people for the safe implementation of his plan. Well, he's not the head of a real mafia like Mario Puzo's Don Corleone, who has henchmen like trees in the forest. The former lawyer lived in the city center, and most of the way home the guys decided when to go to him, now or in the morning. Now, of course, there are more chances to find him at home, but he just might not open the door to strangers and be absolutely right, but they don't have official documents, and Grandma's waiting at home. They both have to go to work tomorrow morning, but they can only meet and go to Makagon in the early evening, when he may well not be at home. She didn't know who he was working with right now, or what time his girlfriend showed up. At least, that's what she claimed. Or will there be more than one? There was no point waiting for him at the entrance now. They didn't know his face. They didn't specify the make and number of the car, which they probably wouldn't be able to do until tomorrow, and they could easily have viewed it. Prilinskaya's phone, however, had a picture of the Cavalier set to the ringtone of his number, but this photo was more than a year old, and he was shot somewhere in the south, half-dressed, so there are problems here. After calculating both ways, weighing all the pros and cons, the guys decided to reschedule the meeting with the former lawyer for tomorrow. As they say, the morning of the evening is more complicated. And indeed, at night, Elena came up with an idea, if not brilliant, then quite sound, which was worth trying to bring to life. Over morning coffee, she shared it with her husband. Max, I'm calling him. Introducing myself as a friend of Madame Prilinskaya, who gave me his number and recommended me as a good specialist in sensitive family matters. Natalia also mentioned that he did not tell her that he was no longer working as a lawyer. So the version is quite working. We need to think about it, and if anything, try it. Set up a meeting somewhere in a cafe, and then how will it go? To drag him into our car, or to ask for him? Although the latter is not an option. Maxim immediately found the first pitfall in her idea. And if he saw you when he was working out all the nuances of the case with Prilinskaya, then it's all for naught at once. He won't even talk to you, but he'll run straight to Nezhnov. After all, what happens? The investigator, who, according to their plan, should already be in jail, instead somehow came out to the person involved in the organizer and is preparing to close him. And this colonel, Max couldn't resist cursing, is sure to stir up something else in a heartbeat. We must either wait or come up with something else. Lena, oddly enough, was against it. No, Max, we can't wait any longer. Your delayed file should already be online, and if it hasn't happened, Nezhnov will realize that you just decided to scare him with your horror stories, and will simply remove you. He'll arrange some kind of accident. I think he's the master here. He's also going to investigate, so you can't dig into it. We can no longer retreat, wait for our chance, and postpone everything for later. Because of me and my stupid decency, this has been dragging on for a very long time. I'm tired. We need to solve everything today. By the way, I have to return my phone today. I promised. Maxime was extremely surprised by Elena's radically changed opinion, who called decency stupid. It seems that she realized that with her rose-colored glasses and such enemies, it is very difficult to live with today. The fake bribe story seems to have fundamentally changed her everyday worldview. She realized that the basic life positions of some people, their beliefs and value orientations may be directly opposite to the generally accepted ones, which she has always tried to follow. It is certainly necessary to strive to comply with the rule of law. But if the big people who almost killed your child are ready to casually destroy you too, so as not to lose their bread place, power and money, what will you do? You know perfectly well that they have much greater opportunities for this than you, a truth-teller who tries to achieve justice by legitimate means. What are you going to do? Will you continue to stupidly struggle as before, and one day realize that you are no more? If, of course, you manage to understand. Or will you gloomily step aside and remain silent, experiencing this terrible cowardice of your own, until you morally kill yourself? Or, knowing that you have the opportunity, even if not entirely legitimate, but you can punish these scoundrels, will you go for it? As for Maxime, he made his choice a long time ago, but in order not to upset his wife, he followed her advice, recognizing her tacit guidance in matters of legality. And now, realizing that there are no limits to human meanness, Lena seems to have reconsidered her position. To the end? Nevertheless, Maxime convinced her not to take risks, not to meet with a former lawyer under the guise of an unknown woman. It took a while to find a solution, but it was fast enough. By lunchtime, through her friends, operatives from the Criminal Investigation Department, Lena managed to find out a lot about Boris Alexandrovich Makagon, and the address, and the number of the car, and the place of work, and even what he does besides work. He lived alone almost in the center of the city, not far from the prosecutor's office, in a fairly decent apartment, in addition to which he also had a modest two-story cottage on the shore of a local reservoir, popularly called the Sea, which was partly true. His car was not exactly new, but it was quite decent, a Toyota Land Cruiser, which cost under several million. However, he worked as a legal consultant in some dubious business that sold horns or hooves, very similar to the well-known Ostap Bender office. He didn't devote much time to his work, but still the company existed, which means that his contribution to it was definitely there. But besides working in an office, which many people knew about, he worked part-time in a specialty where few could see him. He advised on various sensitive issues of criminal and semi-criminal authorities, aspiring small businessmen and all those who hung around not quite honest money. And judging by Boris Makagon's standard of living, he was doing quite well. In the evening, around 7, when Maxim, dressed in a light jacket, began to shake from the autumn cold, and he was about to go to warm himself in the car left at the neighboring house, the long-awaited criminal consultant appeared. Fortunately, he showed up alone and slowly, setting the car alarm, went to his entrance, near which Lena and Max were waiting for him. Makagon looked indifferently at the unfamiliar couple sitting on the bench, but did not attach any importance to this. The house was large, 9 stories high, and he did not know all the residents even in his entrance. Chatting cheerfully, the guys jumped into the elevator after him, asking him to stay for a second. But there was trouble with a personable man in the elevator. He suddenly turned pale, sweated, panted, leaned back against the elevator wall and tried to loosen the knot of his tie. Lena, who did not expect Maxime to solve the problem of contacting her former lawyer so quickly, although she had been secretly expecting something like this, asked in a completely sincere, worried voice, "What's the matter with you? Are you feeling ill?" I didn't wait for an answer and clarified with even more concern. "Can I call an ambulance? May I escort you? Is there anyone at home? Tell him we'll get him." At that time, the elevator stopped and the man, without answering, made an attempt to get out of the cabin. He did it badly, and he staggered helplessly, looking at his friends. Then he finally decided, "I don't know what's wrong with me. My head is spinning. Everything is shaking. Help me out, please. I've been living here since 57th. Grabbing the unfortunate victim by the arms from both sides, the guys led him out of the elevator, and carefully supporting him, led him to a heavy, rich, obviously not Chinese door, with 2 locks, one of which was a combination lock. Here Boris Alexandrovich seemed to feel better, straightened up on his own, took out his keys, but did not rush to open the door, but thanked his unwitting fellow travelers, saying that, then he himself. Well, just like that. Saying a friendly goodbye, they went to the elevator and stood waiting for the elevator that had already run away. Meanwhile, the owner of the 57th apartment opened the door and tried to enter the house, but apparently his strength left him and he fell heavily headfirst into the hallway. The crash from the fall wasn't that significant. In any case, none of the neighboring apartments bothered to inquire about his origin. I had to help the poor guy, drag him into the apartment, undress him and lay him on a luxurious leather sofa in the hall. "Max, aren't you overdoing it?" Lena asked, just as alarmed, to which Maxim only waved his hand dismissively. "He's smiling now. It's just that my blood sugar has dropped. He's coming up now." Indeed, after a couple of minutes, the breathing of the man lying down became more rare and shallow. The pallor was replaced by a slight reddening of his face, and then he opened his eyes. His bleary, wandering gaze became more and more meaningful, and then he asked, not without difficulty, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Apparently this was more important to him than questions about his own health. Maxime, having made sure that the suddenly recovered patient was adequate and able to perceive information, leaned over him slightly and breathlessly said, "We are your guardian angels. We've come to save you." Holding Boris, who was trying to get up and muttering, "What nonsense!" with his hand, he continued, Yes. It is to save from prison," and abruptly changed his voice. "That's enough. Wake up, Golden Company." And immediately on the contrary pushed him in the back, helping him to sit down. Lena, like Macagon, was amazed at the change that happened to Max in 1 second, and involuntarily shuddered. She hasn't joined the conversation yet. Maxim was both tall and built, and probably inferior in strength to the owner of the apartment. But the hypoglycemic attack that had just occurred had securely chained him to the back of the sofa. However, it did not interfere with his thinking. Boris remembered that he rode with these people in the elevator, and they even helped him get to his apartment when he suddenly felt sick. But what do angels in prison have to do with it? "This is nonsense," Macagon kept repeating to himself. Maxim took out a phone he had prepared in advance and offered it to the legal consultant in a friendly way. "Let's listen to one monologue, then I hope you'll understand everything," and turned on the recording of Natalia Prilenskaya's confession. Macagon was a strong-willed man. It's not for nothing that even when he was stripped of his lawyer status, he remained, if not in the profession, then somewhere around. He did not break down, did not drink, but continued to do his own, albeit not quite legitimate business, lived in harmony with himself, and lived well. Only an unscrupulous person, but really determined, can do this. Even now, weakened physically, but already mentally strengthened, he listened to the recording of the dictaphone, in no way reacting to the revelations concerning himself directly. But there was talk of preparing for a crime, of which he was directly accused. With apparent indifference, but very attentively, the former lawyer listened to the recording to the end without asking a single question. Lena, who was surreptitiously watching him, realized that this opponent would be stronger than his mistress, who betrayed all his secrets after the very first insignificant suggestion. When the story ended, Maxime and Lena remained silent. Macagon broke the silence first. "So what? I don't know this woman, and everything she says is complete nonsense. Yes, actually, who are you, and how did this record get to you? It is clear that it will not be illegal for the court to make any difference, even on the contrary. I'm a lawyer, I know." He wanted to say something else, because he felt like he was in his element, but Max harshly interrupted him. Unlike Lena, he did not consider his opponent to be strong, and he was not going to stand on ceremony with him. "That's it! Enough! Have you had enough of the legality? You are not a lawyer, but a former lawyer who was stripped of his status by your colleagues. They threw me out of their society like a shitting puppy," Maxim drawled, emphasizing the word X. "Do you feel the difference? And you still have to live to see the trial. And with your health." Like a well-trained speaker, Max shook his head in disbelief, as if in doubt. Then his face changed, became even tougher, and he smiled predatorily, which made even his wife wary. She had never seen such a smile on his face. Humiliated, Macagon jerked his head as if from a slap in the face, but immediately pulled himself together, and Maxim continued, ignoring his feelings. "If you decide to play Alexander Matrosov and close your chest to your master, who gave you this task, and who we really need in this regard, then you will stay here. You're going to die." Suddenly, he exhaled sharply. "You'll die from the same hypoglycemia." He was getting stronger and stronger. "Are you feeling better? So it won't last long. It's going to happen again. I'm a doctor, I know. And you're going to lie here on this beautiful couch until you rot and stink. The neighbors will smell this disgusting smell in about a week and will call the police. They'll break down your beautiful door. They'll plug their noses with napkins, pack the blue, slimy corpse, bloated to an outrage, into a black bag, and take it to the morgue. The pathologist at the autopsy will grumble and swear because of the stench, but will declare that there are no signs of violence. The usual hypoglycemic coma. Someone might say, "It's a pity that I lived alone. So at least there would be someone to call an ambulance." Do you even have someone who can bury you? Against the background of the listed horrors, he asked indifferently. Suddenly, Boris, who had almost completely regained consciousness, felt restless again, some kind of inner tremor, which was rapidly increasing and accompanied by progressive weakness. His heart began to beat very fast. Breathing became more and more difficult, and he had to take deep breaths in order not to fall out of reality. At the same time, tingling sensations appeared on the lips, tongue, and fingertips. And then something started happening to his psyche. He felt that he could not concentrate, tried to raise his hand to protect himself from his tormentor, but could not. He tried to ask them to stop this monstrous experiment, but only a few indistinct sounds came out of his mouth, not even like human speech, and then he realized that he was falling asleep. Or maybe he's dying. Maxim noticed the changes in Makagon's condition in time and stopped putting pressure on his endocrine system. He felt absolutely no remorse. You've come to ruin someone else's life, so be prepared to do the same to yours. Everything is fair, and it's not a fact that death here will be a lighter punishment than the long, painful years of loneliness and memories. One way or another, Max reasoned, confident in his rightness, and was not going to stop halfway to the truth. When sparks of intelligence appeared in the eyes of the reviving villain, he continued, "What? Is that enough? Or shall we continue?" Maxim grinned again, then exclaimed in amazement, "Yes, you are also unfamiliar with angina pectoris? You'll get to know each other now." "That's enough," the exhausted former lawyer wheezed with difficulty. But Max did not pay any attention to his words. He took fanatical pleasure in taking revenge for his wife, Lena, who, even in such scoundrels, criminals, tried to consider a person, an individual, a personality, and the reasons that made them so, and they repaid her with a completely different coin. A minute later, a sharp pain appeared in Makagon's chest, which was getting stronger and stronger by the second. It quickly filled the entire left half, spread to the left half of the neck, darted into the left arm, all the way to the fingers, then into the shoulder blade, and even into the teeth. I couldn't stand the pain. Boris remembered that somewhere he had heard the common name of this disease, chest toad, and immediately imagined this toad in the form of a red-hot iron standing on his chest. He couldn't take a deep breath, literally feeling the pain getting worse, gnawing at him more and more. On top of everything else, sweat ran down his face in large drops. Drops trickled down my cheeks, chin, and down my neck. But I didn't have the strength to raise my hand and remove these unpleasant, tickling drops. He froze, pressed his hand to his chest and was afraid to move. He also felt scared. Very scared. And suddenly realized that he could easily die right now. Moreover, he understood it quite clearly, and not somehow abstractly, and he had never had such a feeling of fear. Unable to fight the growing pain, Boris closed his eyes in exhaustion. After 5 to 7 minutes, which seemed like an eternity, the pain began to recede, and I wanted to open my eyes again. Makagon made an attempt to move, but the pain did not appear. Brought his hand to his face and wiped away the still disturbing sweat. But the pain did not appear. Took a deep breath. And again, there were no consequences. God, it feels so good, he thought. And how I want to live. Maxim watched with interest his opponent, who was completely at his mercy. But he did not feel any moral satisfaction from this. I just wanted to finish this as soon as possible. Boris Makagon wanted the same thing. All his determination evaporated after reacquainting himself with hypoglycemia, and, to a greater extent, with angina pectoris and its pain. He did not understand how this, in general, an ordinary-looking young man made him, such a seasoned and strong fighter, suffer. Yes, how to suffer. The ease with which the man who called himself a doctor demonstrated his completely opposite professional abilities was frightening, very scary. Boris was not going to relive that terrible feeling of fear of death that he had experienced 10 minutes ago. In addition, he was hurt by the mention of the master, casually uttered by this Dr. Mengele. From somewhere deep in my memory, the name of Dr. Death, the symbol of a murderous and sadistic doctor, floated to the spot. Boris can't have a master. Just by definition, he can't. That's exactly what he thought until today. And now I realize that this boy is right. Yes, The relationship between Makagon and Nezhnov outwardly was mostly friendly and partnership, but Boris always secretly felt the superiority of the police chief over him. He understood that at any moment he could destroy his own lawyer, who tried to break out of his own outlined circle of duties. Once upon a time, the colonel, who was not at all altruistic, helped a lawyer without quotation marks to avoid a more severe punishment than the deprivation of legal status, for which he now had to pay. In previous infrequent meetings, the requests of the non-good Samaritan were modest, and mainly concerned consultations for those who had some disagreements with the law, which at first surprised Makagon. Then he realized who this Colonel Nezhnov was, but he preferred to keep his guesses to himself, and it was too late to back out, and it was absolutely impossible. So maybe now he will have a chance to get rid of the master? When Maxime and Lena left the apartment of the former lawyer, tidying up the sheets of sincere confession written by the morally crushed legal advisor, Lena could not resist, and nevertheless reproached her seriously estranged husband. "Max, what if he had died? Are you out of your mind to torture him like that?" Maxime reacted quite decisively, if not irritably. "Would you rather be in jail? Trust me, it's not a good place, I know. And this Makagon had to be nailed for sure. He's the scoundrel the world has never seen. It's not enough for you that your operative friends have found out about him. He is far from Robin Hood. He spoils the lives of normal people, serves crooks and bandits. Personally, he helped us ruin our lives. Is everything not enough for you? When will you get smarter?" I thought I was talking about stupid decency. He couldn't resist, and without saying a word to his wife, he sent Makagon into a deep lethargic sleep at the door. Let him sleep for a couple of days. Take a break from his worries, and during that time I'll deal with the colonel. Otherwise he'll do something stupid. Warn that, the apologist of horseradish. The day had not gone well for Colonel Nezhnov since the morning, so the mood was not to hell. That's why the morning report was crumpled and nervous, although the colonel didn't seem to have anything to scold his Argali. Well, never mind. In advance, let them not relax. And all because of that fucking lawyer, Bori Makagon. Where did he go, I wonder? Maybe he decided to hide? Curious from whom? Although his idea with the theater actress seemed to be successful. Moreover, it was not necessary to strain your little man in the prosecutor's office too much to throw money at this Avarina. He only had to look at the last case of the Sladachka and quietly take this artist to the prosecutor's office. Well, as for this Major Usoltsev from the USB, just give him a hint. How he doesn't like his fellow cops. It's even interesting. Everything seemed fine the day before yesterday. Boris called back and boasted that everything had ended wonderfully. He met his actress almost at the door of the prosecutor's office, took her home himself, and even did not forget to mention a pleasant bonus for the young lady in the form of a cash payment. He even named a tidy sum, clearly hoping that the colonel would compensate for all expenses. A smart guy. The faithful Vasnetsov, who was resting near the prosecutor's office for control, confirmed everything. And about Makagon and the actress, and about the major from the USB, who, after the fake actress disappeared, soon entered there with 2 escorts. Today, the colonel wanted to meet with his lawyer to find out everything in detail, to hear, so to speak, the story from the first or rather second mouth. The actress certainly told him everything, but he could not reach him. The call was coming, but no one answered the phone. That's why the boss's mood was disgusting in the morning. He didn't like it when things didn't work out, or didn't go according to his understanding. By lunchtime, however, I felt better, and my mood improved. This Boris is not going anywhere from the submarine. He will probably show up by evening. Lena and Maxime did not yet know what to do with the documents exposing both the mayor's son and Colonel Nezhnov on the hit and run and its concealment, the organization of fake bribes, which were accumulating more and more. Lena asked for an evening to review and organize everything again, and then decide how to dispose of these papers. Maxime, who unexpectedly liked the role of a tough operative who absolutely seeks a sincere confession from criminals, offered to run over this werewolf in uniform in the same way. But Elena was against it. "Max, it's just a stroke of luck that we were able to talk to them alone. They didn't know us, they didn't see us. No, the fake Rusakova saw me. But she hid her face more under her hat. Now I understand that, so she managed to trick me. And the colonel knows you very well. He's seen you more than once. And he has more experience in such matters than Madame Prilinskaya and that lawyer Lipovoy combined. And you can't find him anywhere alone. You can't go to his office, where there are always a lot of people. They'll definitely charge for a Zugunder there. The prolonged moralizing ended with Max promising not to make any visits to Nezhnov's office. And then he got lucky.
In the morning, a man died in surgery, with a knife wound in his stomach. It seems to be an ordinary situation, which occurs, if not every month, then certainly several times a year. Everything ended well in such cases, as a rule, but not this time. Everything went wrong here. An elderly, moderately overweight proletarian in a good drink, offended by the whole world because he did not understand him, decided to vent his inner protest and began the re-education of society with his own wife. When it came to fists, the daughter, who herself was over 30, without hesitation poked her father in the stomach with a knife, because she could not pull him away from her beaten mother in any other way. The man became subdued, either from bewilderment, how is it, his own daughter, or from pain, and he reacted quite calmly to the ambulance call, probably even rejoiced. Anyway, he climbed onto the stretcher on his own and hurriedly crossed his arms over his chest. Like, I'm ready, let's go. The 8th hospital was on duty in the city for emergency surgery, and the doctor on duty, Volodya Potemkin, saw the picture of a penetrating wound in the abdomen and almost immediately took the sufferer into the operating room. There was nothing out of the ordinary during the operation either. Yes, a penetrating wound. Yes, liver damage. Yes, blood loss. But, thank God, insignificant. Everything is quite ordinary. The liver wound was sutured. The abdominal cavity was washed, dried. A drain was inserted into the subhepatic space for insurance, and the abdominal wall was sutured. About 40 minutes for everything. Vladimir Ivanovich, as they say, washed his hands, but the young anesthesiologist, Lech Ilyushin, had to tinker. The patient did not want to wake up and breathe on his own. Usually, after the anesthetic is stopped, patients wake up in 10 to 15 minutes. If they don't want to, you can add some respiratory analeptics to excite the respiratory center. It usually helps. But not this time. What didn't Lyosha do? Both Bemegrid and Cityton were injected, and the ventilator was periodically turned off, hoping to catch signs of independent breathing. But I only waited for this in the morning. An hour later, the patient was extubated and transferred to the intensive care unit. And 2 hours later, he died. It was a blow to everyone, so almost half the hospital gathered for the autopsy, which Max conducted after lunch. Naturally sad and agitated at the same time, Lyosha, his boss, Lyudmila Grigorievna, who heads the intensive care unit, Potemkin, who operated on the patient, and his boss, Vladimir Dmitrievich, head of surgery. Everyone wanted to know what happened after the operation and what caused the patient to die. Vladimir Ivanovich was 100% sure that death was not surgical, but the anesthesiologist Lyosha was a little bit off. He didn't seem to have caught up with something. Maxim, who was not at all intimidated by such a large number of viewers, had been working for several years and got to the bottom of it pretty quickly. During the operation, when he was under anesthesia, the patient developed pulmonary embolism, PE, which led to such a sad outcome. PE is a particularly massive, very formidable cardiopulmonary pathology from which most patients die. When a person is conscious, its clinic is very clear and it can be diagnosed and even treated in time. And here is such an unusual situation. Therefore, the end is sad. When the problem became clear and the grateful audience began to disperse from the anatomical theater, the chief surgeon of the city began to be strict and strain Count Potemkin, heating up the already disturbing atmosphere. So, is this traffic police chief lying with you? Take a closer look at him. You know, the law of paired cases. We didn't need to bury someone else from thromboembolism. That's what makes you want to unsubscribe. And that's what. With that, they left. Max, hearing the words about the chief of the traffic police, became alert. What's that? Is Colonel Nezov himself in our hospital? There don't seem to be any other bosses in the traffic police. I wonder what's wrong with him. God himself must have sent it to me here. This is my territory, and I can and should talk to him alone. But Lena doesn't need to know about this at all. Thoughts instantly flashed through his head. After finishing the autopsy, Maxim called his friend Volodya Potemkin at the surgery, whom he called you anyway because of the age difference, although their relationship after the precedent with the glowing dead was really friendly. Vladimir Ivanovich, tell me, the head of the traffic police, whom Vladimir Dmitrievich mentioned in the morgue, is this by any chance Colonel Nizhnov? He's the one, Max. Why do you need it? Potemkin asked. Yes. Maxim hesitated. Then, as it seemed to him, he found a decent way out of the situation. I have problems with the car here. If I take this opportunity to talk to him about it, do you think it's okay? By the way, what about him? Potemkin didn't give a damn about Maxim's maxims. He didn't really care about life. Yes, I operated on him yesterday on duty, even before this guy. He meant the patient who died this morning. The usual phlegmonous appendicitis. Everything seems to be fine. He's in a paid ward if you want. Come in. But it's better tomorrow. He'll be walking tomorrow. When all the respectable doctors who worked at the rate went home after 3, Maxim went to the surgery. The dream ended immediately, and there were no patients loitering along the corridor, as well as hard-working nurses at the department post. So Max, in his light green medical suit, easily passed unnoticed by anyone. He knew where the paid ward was located, next to the head's office at the end of the corridor, next to the emergency exit. Once upon a time, at the dawn of his medical youth, he had already visited here for a small sabantui, organized by the head of surgery, Vladimir Dmitrievich, on the occasion of his own birthday. Maxim was invited rather to help a novice doctor to join a cohesive team. Max did not like to remember this, because his infusion not only into a soldered, but, as it turned out, into a closely knit team ended right in this ward, where he fell asleep peacefully, not calculating his strength in the fight against medical alcohol diluted with glucose. In the morning, horrified to find himself in someone else's bed, he couldn't figure out how it happened and chose to quietly retreat through that very emergency exit. Doctors who were experienced in such matters should be given credit. They did not remind Max of this incident in any way, for which he was overly grateful to them. Without knocking on the door of the familiar room, Maxim resolutely opened it. Let the colonel feel who's boss here now. I'm used to being there, you know. The ward has changed over the years. A flat-screen TV had appeared on the wall opposite the only bed, which was now mumbling softly. On the table next to the Chinese electric kettle, there is a microwave oven, most likely also Chinese, and next to the door against the wall, there is a nice locker for outerwear in an amazing gray-blue color. Colonel Neznov, in a light t-shirt with a small stubble on his face, was lying on the bed and chatting quite cheerfully with someone on the phone. However, his smile periodically changed to a slight grimace of pain when he tried to change his position or laugh at the words of an invisible interlocutor. He stared blankly at the newcomer. Then, obviously recognizing Maxim, he tried to quickly turn the conversation around, but his partner clearly did not want this. So for another full minute, the colonel, no longer smiling, answered questions in monosyllables, and Max, ears hanging open, just stood and listened, although he did not understand the essence of the conversation. When the conversation finally ended, Maxim grinned with all 32 teeth, as if he saw his best friend, or at least a very pleasant person, and opened his mouth from the threshold. Nikolai Sergeyevich, I'm so glad to see you. Then he slowed down a little. I do not greet you, because I do not wish you good health, but I'm really glad to see you. At least I won't have to go to your department again, or run into your secretary. Although she has a pleasant voice, she's so feisty, a real Cerberus, and she tries not to let anyone in. At first, the colonel was taken aback by such a friendly address, but then his gaze became serious, even concerned, but he was in no hurry to enter into conversation. Maxim, having calmed down, continued in an almost sincere tone. But I came to scold you, Nikolai Sergeyevich. What are you doing? I met you halfway, gave you a whole week to arrange everything legally and correctly, make inquiries to Novosibirsk, and meet with the mayor. And you? Nezhnov, frowning, remained stubbornly silent, following his favorite tactic, to get as much information as possible, assess its significance, and then answer unpleasant questions. Maxim did not wait for the policeman's reaction, but continued a little more harshly. And instead, you decided to frame my wife. You organized a fake bribe. Then probably they expected to bargain with me? The colonel made a surprised face, but Max, who was already experienced in such matters, it was immediately clear that this was an ordinary hackneyed trick to get out of a difficult situation, and he would not ride with him. What kind of bribe? What are you talking about? I didn't frame anyone or organize anything. I just didn't have time to sort things out and talk to the mayor. He has all the appointments scheduled in advance. Of course, Maxim interrupted him. We didn't have time. And let's listen to one monologue. And he took out the phone with the confession of actress Prilinskaya, as he had recently taken it out for a conversation with former lawyer Makagan. He even repeated his sentence, almost word for word. Nezhnov listened attentively to the penitent monologue, and, as aggressively as the operated patient could have done a day ago, said exactly what Max had expected. So what? What does it have to do with me? How many enemies does she have? Such people just can't help but have enemies, and I do not know any Makagan. By the way, who is he? Really? Maxim spoke with a touch of malice. Do you know your own lawyer? But he knows you well, and resisted for a long time before he wrote a sincere letter. I'm sorry I can't show you. The prosecutor's office already has it. However, Max did not specify that by prosecutorial he meant his wife. Here Nezhnov froze, not knowing how to react. Should I believe it or not? And Max, knowing that Boris was sleeping peacefully in his apartment, made another move for luck. You must have called him this morning, he said rather affirmatively, and when he saw the colonel's shifty eyes, he realized that he had guessed right. And he doesn't answer. And he won't answer, Mr. Colonel, because he's already in the cell, or lying down, which doesn't matter. After such a debate, Maxim took out several sheets of paper and a simple ballpoint pen from the folder in which he put the autopsy reports, and with the air of a man who does not doubt his right to demand the fulfillment of wishes from others, he said, By morning, Nikolai Sergeyevich, you must write a sincere confession both on the hit-and-run episode and on the organization bribes. This is the last warning, not a request. If there is no confession, tomorrow you will first find yourself in the prison hospital, well, or in our intensive care unit of your choice. Then he paused for a second, fell silent, as if he was thinking about something interesting, and soon continued, satisfied with what he had thought up. By the way, it would be nice for you to arrange a meeting with the mayor there, and then you're all... There's no time. There's no time, he mimicked Nezhnov. There will be a lot of it. Without waiting for an answer, Maxim stood up, calmly picked up the colonel's phone, which he had placed on the bedside table, and, anticipating his attempts to protest, said, I'll return it tomorrow. This is so that you don't do anything stupid. Don't call someone you don't need to. Do you have a full-time killer in your brigade? He finished cheerfully, and winking at the colonel, left the room. If Nikolai Sergeyevich had been healthy, he would have jumped out of bed right now, and of course, would have returned his own phone, which was so badly needed now, but, alas, was disappearing. A sudden sharp pain in his post-operative wound, when he tried to jump up after Maxim, literally threw him on the bed and forced him to abandon the pursuit. Damn, 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 he kept repeating out loud, clenching his fists, not at all thinking about whether he could be heard in the corridor or not. If only he were healthy. What a bad time. After half an hour, having calmed down a little, the colonel began to analyze the events and look for an answer to the question that had been tormenting him for a long time. How did this boy, in fact, always know his way? He doesn't run ahead, but he doesn't lag behind either, and he follows the trail clearly. Maybe it's all about his wife, the investigator? It doesn't look like it, because the colonel always met only with him, and he certainly didn't leave an impression of himself as a small-minded person. They hadn't had time to clean up the mess with his son, as this doctor throws out a bunch of facts, which should be enough for the inspectors to have unpleasant questions specifically for him, Colonel Neznov. And why, Comrade Colonel, did you not pay attention? Did not pay attention? Did not think? And so on. They didn't have time to rejoice and celebrate the execution of a perfectly conceived setup against his wife, as two of the main defendants had already confessed, and, it seems, were now sunbathing on the bunks. Anyway, Borya is a lawyer, who himself assured that everything went more than smoothly, exactly there. Otherwise, why is there no answer to the phone? This has never happened before. And now the discs with the recordings from the surveillance cameras have disappeared, and, apparently, they are in the possession of the one who knows the way. And what? That's a good name. Why doesn't Averin send these killer documents anywhere, but only frightens them? It seems that the security officers should have been visiting the colonel long ago, and not this Madame Averina. They're taking their time. Is this nonsense? Or an incomprehensible maniacal desire to force him to file a case against the mayor's son and make them quarrel? Something is wrong here, and this boy is not that simple. Very difficult. To crack a criminal case, bison like Borya Makagan, you have to be a bison yourself, or at least an interrogator, some kind of geriatrician. They are masters at such things. They are specially taught this. That's when Nikolai Sergeyevich got scared of his own thoughts. Nevertheless, we will have to involve the mayor in solving this problem. After all, it all started with him, so let him sort it out himself. In the morning, after coming to work and quickly changing his clothes, Max went straight to Colonel Neznov's room. He did not flatter himself with the hope that Nikolai Sergeyevich would suddenly change, and his awakened conscience would force him to write a sincere confession. But nevertheless, he allowed such a development of the situation with a probability of 1 to 1.5%. Well, what if? The colonel's face, which on the one hand seemed mature and manly because of the overgrown stubble, on the other was still a little pale, wrinkled, with some dark circles under his eyes. It seems that the policeman spent last night not in a peaceful sleep, but in heavy, maybe even painful thoughts. To change so much in one night, you have to go through something very unpleasant, and apparently the colonel had enough of this unpleasant.
But his eyes remained cold and hard, and did not fit at all into the picture of an absent and worried face. They were the eyes of a predatory beast, a wolf, which the colonel, in order not to alert Maxime, who entered the room, immediately tried to take aside. Perhaps it would have succeeded, but the malice emanating from him was clearly felt from a distance. Max was struck by this unusual and unpleasant feeling, which he had never experienced in his life, and at first he was even a little confused. Then, remembering his measure of protection, he calmed down completely and even smiled. Let him be angry, even if he wipes all his teeth to the roots. Gleb Zheglov said something similar to the brick thief, and finished beautifully. Mine will always take against yours. That's mine too, Max assured himself. On the edge of the table, pressed down by a pen, was a stack of blank sheets of paper left yesterday. Maxime, without greeting or paying attention to the colonel, looked carefully at the paper, even turned over and looked at each sheet separately. After making sure of their pristine purity, he shook his head in disappointment and looked up at the colonel. The latter, trying to hide his interest, watched the newcomer surreptitiously, slightly closing his eyelids. Maxime didn't give a damn about the problems of the proud colonel. He had already decided everything for himself. Well, Nikolai Sergeyevich, Max said neutrally, you've made your choice. He stood for a couple of seconds and thought. Commendable, but stupid. Then he calmly turned around and headed for the exit. Give me the phone back, the colonel almost shouted at Maxime's back, restraining himself. He slowed his pace a little and turned his head slightly. I'll return it to the intensive care unit, he added thoughtfully. although I don't think there will be time for that, and calmly left the room. Nikolai Sergeyevich clearly did not expect such a dismissive attitude. He was literally taken aback, and when he came to himself, he was lost in gloomy thoughts again. Over the years of working in the police, especially when he became the chief, the colonel learned to understand people well, felt them, and often used it. Many years of life experience have said that ordinary people with police colonels do not behave like this pathologist Averin. The fact that he works as a doctor and that his last name was Averin was beyond doubt. But the rest? Immediately after the first visit to the department, when he began to ask uncomfortable questions, Nikolai Sergeyevich gave the command to punch the overly curious pathologist. This was done by competent and responsible people, so there was no mistake here. It was stupid to think that he was an FSB agent who was digging under him or under the mayor. A hypnotist. Funny. It would have been easier for him to convince the colonel to write a sincere letter with such details, which in fact did not exist. Who's left? A sorcerer? Yes, indeed. Insanity is getting stronger and knocking on the door. And then the colonel suddenly remembered Maxim's last sentence as he left. That's how, instantly, I jumped from one to the other. I'll give it to the intensive care unit. There won't be time for that. He clearly heard the words of the departed doctor. What kind of intensive care unit? Why won't there be time for that? What's not up to this? The colonel asked someone in his mind, but very loudly. His anxious thoughts were confused, jumping from one thing to another. He could not concentrate and decide what to do next with this Maxim, who was completely unafraid of the policeman, until it was time for a medical checkup. Volodya Potemkin, Nikolai Sergeyevich's attending physician, immediately drew attention to the unpresentable appearance of his VIP client. He seemed to look better yesterday, but today he looks kind of gloomy, twitchy, circles under his eyes. Nikolai Sergeyevich, how are you feeling? Vladimir Ivanovich asked, putting as much optimism into his voice as possible. Neznov just waved his hand and parted his lips in a kind of smile. Don't pay attention. I didn't sleep well, that's all. He lied here, keeping silent about his train of thought. Vladimir Ivanovich, remembering who was in front of him and not forgetting the parting words of the head, looked at his patient with all care, counted the pulse, looked at the tongue, felt the stomach, was not too lazy to peel off the bandage and look at the wound. I was satisfied with the examination, but nevertheless decided to support my patient. Everything is fine with you, Nikolai Sergeyevich. The stomach is calm. The wound is behaving fine, but you need to sleep. Let's take a sedative pill after the dressing and get some sleep. They'll give you another one in the evening, and then everything will be fine. Nikolai Sergeyevich woke up from some kind of inner anxiety. At first, he didn't understand what had woken him up, and only then did he pay attention to his left leg. The leg felt strange, heavy and tense, and there was also an unpleasant feeling of goosebumps crawling on the leg. Besides, thousands of small creatures were running over my leg, burning and pricking it like thousands of needles. As soon as he realized that the problem of his anxiety was his leg, he immediately felt pain. The pain appeared somewhere on the periphery, then darted up the shin to the knee, and then higher. Besides, it was growing by the minute. Thinking that he was just resting his leg, the colonel decided to resort to a radical remedy, which he had used before to get rid of similar, though less pronounced sensations that arose from time to time. Just walk around, stretch his leg. He tried to stand up and succeeded. With pain, but succeeded. But it didn't work out. After taking a couple of steps, Nikolai Sergeyevich realized with horror that his leg was not obeying and resembled a prosthetic, a blunt wooden prosthesis. She was a complete stranger, and he couldn't command her. Staggering to his bunk, he collapsed onto the mattress and tried to examine and rub his naughty, aching leg. The foot was pale, cold, with incomprehensible shapeless blue spots, and touching it was somehow distant and completely alien. There were no changes when trying to rub and massage the leg, except for increased pain. The pain was already hard to bear. I'll have to call for help, he thought with displeasure, already realizing that he had not just laid off his leg, but had acquired some other, serious and unpleasant sore. Imagining himself yelling at the entire squad, he immediately ground his teeth in frustration and shame. but there was nothing to do, so I had to. I even had to tap on the metal headboard with a spoon until a disgruntled nurse appeared in the doorway. When she saw the grimace of pain on the patient's face and instantly realized that such a person would not just yell and hammer with a spoon, she immediately fussed, wailed, and almost ran out in search of a doctor. Vladimir Ivanovich appeared a couple of minutes later. Even a cursory inspection was enough for him to realize the seriousness of the colonel's problem. Having calmed Nezhnov with meaningless words, he left the ward and returned just a minute later with the head of Vladimir Dmitrievich, who was just returning from the emergency room. He stared a little longer. He squeezed and stabbed alternately the foot, the shin, then the thigh, asked to bend or lift the leg, and when this failed, to move his fingers. He tried to feel the pulse in his groin and foot, compared all the detected changes with the other leg and was clearly unhappy. At first, he puzzled Potemkin. Call the sanitation department, ask for a vascular specialist here. Yes, let it blow at the right pace. Keep the operating room puzzled, just in case. Call the lab assistant. Let her look at the coagulation system, and the group, of course. Call the transfusion station. Check the stocks of this group. Now there's riopoliglucin in a vein, heparin, papaverin, promedol, and everything else that's required, you know. And only then turn to Nezhnov. Nikolai Sergeyevich, we have a problem that needs to be solved as quickly as possible. It looks like you have a blood clot in the main artery of your thigh or popliteal region, so the blood has stopped flowing to the periphery. There is not enough oxygen for the tissues, the metabolic processes are disrupted. In short, if nothing is done, gangrene will develop and the leg will need to be amputated. The operation to remove a blood clot can only be performed by a vascular surgeon, whom we have already called in. Of course, we won't wait for him without doing anything. We'll start intensive therapy, try to thrombolize, and it's easier to resolve. But he still has the final say. A minute later, a riopoliglucin solution was already dripping into his vein, which, as he was assured, improves microcirculation and precisely postpones irreversible changes in bloodless tissues. And the nurse injected the necessary drugs one by one into a rubber tube near the needle. After another 5 minutes, he felt that the pain seemed to recede a little and began to calm down, even dozing off. The verdict of the vascular surgeon was expected, and Nikolai Sergeyevich was taken into the operating room shortly after being examined by a regional specialist. It turned out to be much easier to meet with the mayor of the city than with the same head of the city traffic police department. In any case, the young lieutenant, who was sitting on the first floor in front of the entrance to the administration building, did not ask Maxime any questions, and he freely went up to the third floor. The building is large, and in addition to the mayor's office, there were a lot of other services and farms here. And the City Council of People's Deputies, where people were quite active, was also here. Because of this, it seems, the lieutenant did not bother. They go and let them go. So people need to. In front of the reception area, where the doors of the offices of both the mayor and the chairman of the city council with the amazing name Lubomir opened, it was crowded, which at first Max did not like. He was used to solving his affairs in a private conversation without witnesses, but there was nowhere else to go, and he slowly moved towards his intended goal. Near the double-leaf door, on both sides of which plaques with the names of the mayor and the chairman of the city council were fixed on the wall, 2 medics in standard blue suits with the inscription, "Ambulance," on the back, hurriedly overtook him. One of them, a man, was carrying a standard orange medicine box and a rolled-up padded stretcher, while a young girl was holding a defibrillator in a green case. It was getting more and more interesting. Something must have happened to the mayor, Max thought, perplexed. There were even more people in the reception area than in the hallway, and among the restlessly discussing people, Maxim even saw a policeman with large stars on his shoulder straps. He was trying to shout over the discordant rumbling hum, answering someone on the landline phone on the secretary's desk. His tunic was unbuttoned, and his face was red and angry. The secretary was not at the desk. No one paid the slightest attention to Max's arrival, and he was a little confused, not knowing what to do or who to ask about the possibility of meeting with the mayor. He looked around helplessly, turning his head in the hope of meeting a familiar face, and then someone touched his shoulder from behind. "Maxim Sergeyevich, what are you doing here?" A familiar female voice rang out. "Galina Nikolaevna, Volodya Potemkin's wife, who was already elected to the city council for the second or third time, and invariably headed the Committee on Social Affairs, smiled warmly at Maxim, although her eyes were sad. Max was acquainted with Galina Nikolaevna, and was frankly delighted to meet her. At least one familiar and probably knowledgeable person in this mess who will bring him up to date and tell him what is going on here. Smiling, he replied, "Galina Nikolaevna, hello. Yes, I came to make an appointment with the mayor, and here it is." He spread his hands helplessly and looked around, as if inviting Galina Nikolaevna to share his amazement. She shook her head negatively, furrowed her brows, and pursed her lips mournfully, causing her face to immediately darken. "No, Maxim Sergeyevich, you won't be meeting the mayor for a while now," she said as if it were completely obvious, took his arm and insistently moved into the corridor. Maxim didn't really resist. At the window of the small hall where there was no one present, Galina released Max from her custody. "Viktor Alexievich has a misfortune. My son crashed in a car to his death," she said sadly in a sympathetic tone. Max was taken aback, shuddered, and even seemed to shrink, becoming smaller. A couple of days ago, he wished all sorts of misfortunes to this major, who almost killed his son, and was even ready to punish him harshly. But now he suddenly felt a pang of pity. "Young, stupid. Dennis?" he exclaimed involuntarily. "Dennis," Galina Nikolaevna confirmed, and looked at Max with interest. "Do you know him?" Maxim was embarrassed, and hurriedly replied, "Not personally, but I've heard a lot." He decided not to talk about meeting the mayor's son in absentia after the accident with Alyosha. There's no time, and there's no need. "The police have just come and informed him," Potemkina continued. "But he felt unwell. He turned white all over, fell down. I had to call an ambulance urgently. I don't want to have a heart attack," she finished anxiously, after telling a few more meaningless details to Maxim, who was already thinking about something else entirely. Galina Nikolaevna returned to the reception area, and Max went home to deliver the stunning news to his wife. As he got into the car, he saw the mayor being carried out of the administration building on a stretcher and carefully loaded into an ambulance. There was no elevator in the 3-story building. Moreover, the head was carried not by ambulance staff, but mostly by men, including a policeman in an unbuttoned tunic. Either everyone really loved the mayor so much and sincerely wanted to help, or they were just demonstrating their zeal and diligence. Maybe he'll come back and remember.